Okay. Jessica, Paul should rejoin us in a couple minutes here. But if you want to get started with feel free.
Get it started?
Well, that's what we did.
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, I will welcome everybody here. The reason I'm welcoming folks is that this is the reorganizational meeting for the Planning Commission. So the first item of official item will be to elect your chair, vice chair, secretary, and set your regular meeting dates. So we'll do that first. Before we do it, emergency exits for anybody who's here in person, leave out the back. You can go left or go right. Washrooms are behind us for anybody who's online. We're not monitoring the chat for comment, but if you do have something that you'd like to say, please feel free to put that in the chat that you'd like to speak, and I'll keep track of that.
Oh.
So just one moment while I bring up the agenda. If it's okay with everybody, I'm going to skip the public items and the announcements, do the organizational meeting first, and then whoever's chair can run through the rest of that, if that's okay. So I would accept nominations for the chair. If anybody's interested, I'll offer nominations.
Can we do a slate?
I'll move. You
Do
can
the
do
whole
it
slate.
however you like.
Yeah, move the slate and I'll second it.
Yeah, I move
Okay.
to vote on the slate of nominees.
Can you turn on your mic?
Turn your,
Vote to move, I move to vote on the slate of nominees of Jessica Luisos as chair. Duncan MacDonald as vice chair. And Paul Engels as clerk.
I'll second that.
Would anybody like to have, I guess before we have discussion, are there other nominations or questions? Colin, as the new person, do you have anything that you wanted to say before there's a?
Well, I guess I was gonna ask what slate meant, but then it was contextually made apparent to me.
All right, I'll ask it again. Are there any other nominations? Jessica, Duncan, Paul, if nominated, would you accept these roles?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So any further discussion? Any questions or comments from the public? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I
And
I
thanks
did-
to
no
thank you
opposed?
for agreeing to serve.
All right, and phew, for one more year, my official thing is done. So I
Okay,
hand the meeting over to Chair Luisos.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you all, and I'm open to suggestions as to how to improve. So if you have any suggestions, let me know now or later. You know.
Well, they're mostly about Paul, so we'll do it in private.
Okay, you can tell Paul directly if
Paul.
he, oh, this Paul.
Oh,
I was gonna say, Paul Engels has had to run our meetings many times as our clerk this year, and it's been great. Okay, so we will move back to the agenda. Are there any other agenda changes? Okay, open to the public for items not related to the agenda. You can raise your hand or come up or unmute if you're online. Okay, hearing none, we will move on. So announcements and staff report. Does anyone have any announcements? Okay, staff report, I guess.
Couple of things for you. I handed you a letter. You've already received this digitally, so it was a letter of feedback after the last meeting regarding one of the items from your public hearing. It was also shared with the counselors, so the council has that. Couple of other announcements. I think we'll talk about it in a little while, but or I know we will talk about it. The council did warn the draft regulations for public hearing on September 16th, which means that as of last Thursday, they are in effect pending council action. If council modifies it, then they are welcome to modify it, and our development review team will adjust accordingly. But we have shared that with their team, and so pending their action under state law, it is in effect. And I think those are my couple of announcements. I see that on your agenda, I guess my one suggestion might be, I think we are running a little bit ahead of time. And so you might want to do a different item because I'm not sure that everybody's here for the street naming component just yet, because I think it was advertised for 7:30.
I just want to note, a couple people just came in and I didn't know if they wanted to speak on an agenda, an item not on the agenda. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Han. Well, I think what we could do is actually finish agenda item 5 first. So we have our regular meeting schedule we need to vote on. So right now, and for the past many years, it's been the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month at 7. Avoiding holidays. Does that seem
Like
reasonable?
the current schedule.
Yeah.
So I would move to set the planning commission schedule for the second and fourth Tuesdays of each month for fiscal year 2025.
Yeah, and I'd like to just have a discussion about maybe moving it up a half an hour so that we're not skewed.
Can you turn on your mic?
Sorry. Just wondered if we could have a discussion about perhaps moving the meeting up a half an hour so that we wouldn't be here so late. Because sometimes we're here at 10 o'clock. This feels wrong.
9:30 sounds much better.
9:30 sounds much better than 10 o'clock.
No, I'm just wondering, does that affect staff at all?
Yeah, I just wondered why it got set at 7. If there's.
It got set at 7 because it used to be 7:30
Oh.
when I started. So I think that's where it was. It's okay with me. I think I'd love to check with Kelsey if you wanted to defer that action on that
Sure.
time, just in
Okay.
terms of 2 little kids, and can she make it back here? Because she's normally the primary staff
Yeah,
person.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and
For those who have their dinner before coming here, 7 o'clock is probably better. For me, it doesn't matter because I never eat before I come here.
I wouldn't make it through the night.
Yeah, that's
no, me
problem.
neither.
Well,
I like 7, but I could, if the majority wants 6:30, we could entertain that, obviously. So.
I mean, I'm open either way. Definitely, I guess, yeah, my concern is, I don't know if anyone's here personally, but like, yeah, if someone's getting off at 5, do you have time to get home, cook dinner and come here before 6:30 might be tight for some. And I don't know, even if it's not a problem this time, maybe we worth considering if, for example, could be a dissuasion to people in that schedule in the future from applying to the commission for something. But that said, it is only half hour, so I'm open either way.
it would be especially a problem for people with children.
Yeah, that too, of course, yes.
So I agree that we can leave it up to Kelsey then.
So why don't you vote on the dates and then maybe defer the action of the time till your next meeting, if that's okay?
Okay. Paul, do we need to make a note of like the holiday schedule at this point, or like when do
I think you can
we?
just say, to be adjusted for holidays. So as we get later in the year, we'll review the calendar of all the major events, and we do that in October. If you want,
Okay.
next time the holidays are known earlier, so we could have it for this organizational meeting. Typically also you don't meet for the second meeting in December because it's,
Yeah,
I think that the open meeting law says regular meetings. It doesn't mean you have to meet every single time, but you have to set a regular meeting date. So second and fourth Tuesdays is your regular. You can have irregular that modify that. So I think you're fine with the motion as presented.
We've changed on the fly when we had to accommodate religious holidays.
Yeah,
of
so we'll
various
publish
kinds.
that schedule for you in the not too distant future, but for the purposes of setting a regular date, you're fine just setting it as the motion was made.
And we don't want to have, like, the city council, if Monday often is a federal holiday, so then we automatically meet on that Tuesday. Just so you can kind of plan. Is that something we would want to do, like if the Tuesday is a religious holiday or?
Typically, that's what we'll do is if, let's say the Tuesday is a religious holiday, then we'd
We'll meet
propose that
on
it be on a
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Okay.
Also, if the council happens to be meeting on that Tuesday, that bumps the planning commission, then we would
Okay,
propose to bump the planning commission. This year, there was only one conflicted date the entire calendar year because Tuesdays typically have fewer, but
mhm.
last year there were 4, so. We'll.
So
we'll
we
work
have
it
a
through and
motion for
provide-
our regular meeting schedule.
Is there any discussion, or questions from the public?
This is Paul.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I wonder if we could just get a sense of who would prefer 7 and who would prefer 6:30. We give Chelsea.
I can't hear you,
Kelsey.
Paul.
Sure. So Paul just said, could we get a sense of which commissioners prefer 7 and which prefer 6:30? Which might help our decision. Okay, so we'll do a straw poll, like who would prefer 7 and then second, who would prefer 6:30? Okay, so who would prefer 7?
I think I would. Can we do?
Me,
um,
I'd prefer
Like
7.
either one?
Uh,
I'm agnostic, but
okay, so Paul had his hand up for 7, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm ambivalent. I
And you
guess.
can vote for both.
Oh,
which,
sure.
Okay, and then who would prefer 6:30?
I vote for neither or both.
Okay, you're allowed to vote for
Sorry.
neither as well. Okay. Okay, so it seems like there's at least a leaning toward 7.
there's
So-
a corollary to that. That's the end at 9.
We can,
I'm just teasing you.
I think she does a wonderful job at.
buddy.
I
ending
know, I might need to
mostly
cut
on
you
time.
off sometimes.
So if the majority want 7 and that's where you want to settle,
Yes.
then we don't need to wait on
Yeah, that's
staff for
Okay,
that,
so-
but that's up to you all.
Are there any other comments or questions? Paul, did you have anything else? I think I might have cut you off.
No, I think that, as Paul just said, if the majority wants 7, then maybe we could just go ahead with 7.
Okay, so Michael, you had the motion. Do you want to adjust your motion
I didn't hear what Paul said.
to include the time?
Let's make it 7.
Okay. I move that to set the planning commission schedule for the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of each month for at 7 PM for fiscal 2025.
Helen, were you okay with that adjustment? 'Cause
I'll second it. Yes, yes.
Okay, any additional discussion?
Friendly.
Okay, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 And that was unanimous. Paul had his hand up as well.
Can you see, you must be able to see me because you can see that I have my hand up.
I can see you, yes.
Okay. Okay.
I think everyone can see you.
Okay.
That's okay.
We talked about the street nine before last time.
Okay, so,
I think they
So
told us
can
we-
I
that's a-
suggest,
No, it's not.
you've got a few guests that are still waiting to arrive for the street name
Oh, yeah,
component.
Some kids, maybe? I guess.
Yes. So may I suggest maybe we do part of item 8, which is an update on the city center green.
Mhm.
Nick's going to take the lead on that. So if that's okay with you all.
that sounds great. Thanks, Nick.
Sure thing. So I'm really just passing on an update of work done by our colleague Alana Blanchard, who's our community development director. But Alana would like us to just talk briefly about some of the work that's been done on City Center Green. A few weeks ago, there was a public forum that introduced how the process has gone so far. I don't know if anyone here was able to attend that. There was a presentation made at that forum, which will be available online shortly, sometime this week. And Alana is going to be putting that up. And the long and the short of the process basically is that so far the city has selected 2 different locations for the potentially where a town or a city green could go. One is across the street and Market Street, and then the other one is somewhere on what is currently the U Mall property. Yeah, I guess I'm pointing in the wrong direction. For some reason, I always think that this is like the Garden Street side, so
That's, yeah.
Market Street. Yes, Market Street. So now that we all know exactly what we're talking about, Market Street and somewhere on the U Mall property pending redevelopment of that larger property. However, this process or this land acquisition is not funded. And it would be dependent, and that funding would be, that would be something that we would have to see city council take up and decide to fund on their own initiative. However, planning has gone into potential options for what a park could look like so that folks could know what could be funded. Variety of activities have been explored, all of which is put up onto the presentation, and some more details are included in tonight's memo as well. There will be some opportunities for public comment located on the same website as the presentation. We'll make sure to send this around to commissioners as well and make note of it in the next agenda. There will be public comment accepted through the second, maybe third week in September. And a recommendation following that public comment and further discussion will be made to the city council in October, at which point they'll be able to make a decision about whether they want to pursue acquisition, fund design or construction, whatever action they feel is appropriate to take at that point. Yes, Michael.
Nick, or everybody, it was my impression that there was a set of priorities, and the first priority was the one across the road here. And there were a few people like me who felt that over in the U Mall parking lot was disconnected from city center. And Councillor Barrett also suggested, which would be better, that the other parking lot that's behind the Blue Mall, if we could incorporate that, that would be a really ideal. But I didn't hear or see at that last meeting that the one in the parking lot of U Mall was desirable. You've made it a kind of second priority. Is that what you?
There's no real ranking of it. These are just potential areas where, given the activities and uses that have been planned for a potential green, these are the places that were deemed to be like could host those eventual activities.
Yeah, but there was certainly a priority was arrived at the end of that meeting that it was clear to the presenters that this property across the street was the most favored.
Well, and I think that's the purpose of the public meetings, is the consultants are identifying what could be functional, and then the feedback is where is the community expressing interest in it to then inform the council as their decision making. So this is all helpful feedback.
It certainly is, yeah. And the more feedback, the better, obviously, which is why we'll be putting that website out for public interaction. And we certainly hope to see feedback come through throughout that whole period, so that the city council has the maximum amount of information to make their decision in October.
For my personal information, and maybe others, could we have the CV of Wagner Hodgson? See what work he's done in the past.
A CV? Oh,
It'll give us a sense of how he thinks.
What about their website?
Which website?
The companies?
He's got a website?
I would think they do. They're a big firm.
Oh, okay,
That seems like maybe
I'll do that.
better.
I'll do that.
We'll look at their website.
They've done a number of efforts in and around both our community and beyond, public sector and private sector. They're landscape architects by trade. That's their area.
I have a question. What is,
Nope.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Second.
Nick, quick question. What piece of property are we talking about over here?
It's the Poon.
Boone property. Okay, all right. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
That's one of them. It's
Yeah.
not that the whole purpose of the project is to look at options.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't know which piece of you were referencing over here.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just my question is, does the planning commission have any role in this selection? We don't, do we?
This was my question. Yeah. Very interesting question.
Only as a
Matter of.
resident or?
The commission is welcome to provide feedback either informally or formally if you like. It is a council project that they're taking.
Okay.
So if you'd like to have that as a
You're hungry?
agenda item so that you can formally discuss it, that certainly welcome. If you'd like to do that.
pasta very good. You don't want a piece of
Folks online, if you could please mute yourself, appreciate it.
no.
There we go. Okay. So that's something you can certainly discuss, and as the planning commission, if you would like to formally weigh in, then, you know, I'm sure it's always welcome. So
Well, it wouldn't require any changes to zoning or anything. I mean, I certainly have ideas about it and opinions, but I went to the first meeting and expressed them there. I couldn't make the second one. So that seems to me to be a better venue for public input. Because I'm just not certain that the planning commission has a dog in this fight. Unless it requires some zoning changes.
it is not a required element for the planning commission.
Okay.
So you can choose to, because the planning commission has the broad mandate to look at all things long-range planning, but there's nothing that formally is an action of yours.
And I think one place it has come up for us is kind of the recommendation in the comprehensive plan to have something like this. So, but it was like a general statement of the desire of the city to have a green.
And that's been adopted.
And that was adopted, so,
By the
and
council, so
yeah,
it's there.
yeah.
Fine. Okay.
Yeah, where did the form-based code leave this? Because I know that the very earliest iteration of planning for the city center included a town green. And that kind of followed through, but then the form-based code just didn't seem to know how to deal with it because it was private property. And yet it seems like there was a big missed opportunity for identifying this is where it's gonna go. Cause that would have been the ideal time because there's so much of traffic planning and particularly pedestrian path planning that needs to follow the location of that place. And, you can already see that, it wasn't well established. Like, how do you get from the elementary school through this site to a public park? That just didn't seem to be part of the planning because it was all about the streets and going around and there really wasn't enough thought about pedestrian movement throughout city center, I don't think. It was just all secondary to the streets, which I think we're now all realizing it's like, that we missed an opportunity there.
Paul, you have your hand up, and I know you were on that committee. She's referencing.
Yeah, a couple of things. I was actually chair of the committee. The form-based code committee identified the area on both sides of Potash Brook as the preferred sites for parks. So the park would have run through city center on both sides of Potash Brook. And one of my questions was, what's become of Potash Brook? I'd be curious to know, if it's been built over or what's happened with it. The other question I had was the availability of the property. We can have all kinds of ideas about what we'd like to see, but if we can't purchase the property, then that'll be a problem. And I know that there's been efforts to purchase the property across from City Hall Park for years now. And I assume is it still, Paul, do you know, is it still owned by the same people that own the Orchid Restaurant?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So, they certainly know the value of their property and they haven't sold it for years now. Do you know the status of purchasing this property?
That is the subject of this review and study, Paul, is to identify priorities for the city so the city council can decide where they want to put their efforts of negotiating with any property owner. So that's
Because I'd hate
that's
to see us
broadly where
get all
things.
excited. I mean, obviously, across the street from City Hall would be the perfect place for the green. But if we get all excited about it and then it's not available, but the property in Umall is available, then all of a sudden the park is over in Umall. So I guess I'd like some information about that. And I don't know. I think that I thought we did a great job with the Form-Based Code Committee. And I think we outlined a lot of things that we could have done that weren't done. And we certainly looked at the streetscapes and the building envelopes, and I thought presented a really good proposal, which it just hasn't been followed. So I'd like to not take responsibility for what wasn't done. Okay, thanks.
No, thanks, Paul. I know that, you know, this concept we're talking about tonight was a big part of your recommendation from that committee to have it happen. So it's good that it's, you know, there's work towards it. And, you know, I think one of your points is maybe a good reason to continue to identify multiple sites that could meet the needs identified, you know, instead of putting all the eggs in the one basket, you know, in case something isn't available.
Well, it'd be great if we could get the property across the street, but that's been probably a multi-decade negotiation. So.
Does anyone have, Helen?
Well, I just want to comment, none of the property is owned by the city that we're talking about. So there's sort of two big questions. One, do you continue the conversation that we should have a city hall park somewhere and make that decision, seems to me. And then, and maybe even identify some funding for the possibility of a park. And then you need to move to the next step, is working with the landowners in the area to say who wants to sell us land.
I think that's
So-
exactly right, Helen. Those are the two steps there.
Yeah, right. Are there other comments or questions up here? Is there anything from the public on this item? Okay, did we get to the end of this here? Okay. So we had temporarily rearranged our agenda. We've completed 1 through 5. And then we completed number 8. Paul, was there anything else you were gonna add right now?
Oh, me?
Yes. Sorry, I thought you were waving at me. I missed.
No. I'm just
Okay.
I've got a dog barking here, so I'm
Okay,
trying.
good. Then we will move on to item number 6, which is a street name, which many of you know is one of my favorite things. And it is for a new road east of City Hall, north of Market Street.
Madam Chair,
Mhm.
before we proceed with this, hats off to the school for letting the students choose the name. I mean, that's really, I love that idea. Terrific.
Yes,
We've
so
got a whole process laid out here, Michael, for,
you're
they're gonna give a
jumping
whole
ahead.
presentation to you.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh,
Okay, so Paul, did you want to start us out with a little intro to get us started? Or-
I think just to welcome the folks in the Rick Marcotte Central School. Their principal, Lisa McDonald, I believe, is going to lead some of the students to talk about exactly how they got to a proposed name for you. And then they're here to see how community government works in terms of taking recommendations and then making formal votes to make decisions. So I think I will hand it over to Mrs. McDonald. You sure can. Can you come up to the mic though, because nobody online can hear unless you're right there with the bright green light to hit.
Okay, well, do you need help getting set up? Do you think?
There's a little button.
Yep, there's a little button.
Hello,
Yep, you got it.
I'd like to invite the students to come forward, and it seems like they'll be needing to use the microphone. My question is, should the students be facing you or should they be facing the audience during the?
That is a great question. So everything is presented to us.
Okay.
And any questions or comments can be addressed to me as chair. If there are questions or comments kind of as we move forward, people would raise their hands and I would kind of call on them and kind of direct any conversation that happens after that point.
Okay, so another question is, how would I work them? Should I just move the
There's two
microphone
mics.
to
So-
each
Could switch
Yep.
that one on
student?
too.
Okay,
So
Three.
they could,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and can we present our presentation? Can I?
is
plug
it,
in?
is it slides?
Yes,
Yes.
they are slides.
You can, way to do it will be to log into the meeting on Zoom. So I can send you information. Is that computer on the internet? If not, I can help you get there.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we are very excited. And like I said, naming of streets has always been one of my very, very favorite things. So we're very pleased to have some good input into our process tonight. And for those of you in the audience, we are a 7-member commission. And Paul, who you see online, is one of our commissioners. So when we have actions, we often hear a presentation from people who are giving us information. So that's a lot of you tonight. And then what happens after we get our information is we see if any of the commissioners have initial questions and get those answered. And then if we also open it up to the audience to see if there's any additional questions on the presentation. And when we feel like we've gotten all of our information and our questions are answered, then we have a discussion as the commission as to what we want our action to be. So in the case of street naming, often we will, at that point, one of us would make a motion. Another person would have to second that motion. So that's like the action that we want to have done. And then we would have a discussion as a commission about whether or not we like that idea that one of us put forward, that motion. It's basically an idea or a suggestion. And then we would vote on it. So I think that would be kind of our goal for tonight after we hear from you, to have that discussion and questions and potentially be ending with a motion where we would choose the name or vote on which name.
Maybe, Jessica, could you take a moment to describe who you are, who the commission is? Because you're all residents of our community. You are representing our community and
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the 7 of us make up the Planning Commission for our city of South Burlington. Each of us applied for the position and got appointed by our city council, who's elected. And each of us is working as a volunteer to come and try to do the best we can to represent our community in making decisions about how we use our land, how our streets are named, thoughts about like what kinds of buildings can go in different locations. You just heard a little discussion about parks. So those are some of the things that we talk about. And we each have other things we do in our lives, whether they're different jobs or other volunteering we do in addition to the work we're doing here. So this is just a small part of what each of us does. Did I miss anything about our description?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Required by statute.
We are required, so all municipalities are required to have a body like ours that helps with planning for the future. Oh, wonderful. Okay.
okay. And maybe Nick, maybe you could be prepared to walk the mic around to folks, to the kids.
Is it, Nick, I could use this one too, no?
Okay,
And there's a second one.
and then students, I will give you the mic when it's your time to speak. Okay? Are we ready? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are Rick Marcotte Central School. I am Lissa McDonald, the principal of the school, and we are here to present to you this evening because we've conducted a year-long project which resulted in the naming of our city street. The committee members are going to introduce themselves at this time. So we will begin with our third graders.
Just talk right into that mic, please.
My name is Gwen. My name is Lee. My name is Asley.
Welcome.
It's me. Everybody here. Pass that, please. When you're
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Camila, and I'm in Miss Appleby's 5th grade. My name is Nora, and I'm in Miss 4th grade.
My name is Sierra, and I'm in Mrs. Kavanaugh's 5th grade.
My name is Lillian, and I love to play softball. I'm in Miss Smith's 4th grade.
My name is Nora, and I am a 6th grader at Tuttle Middle School.
Wonderful. Well, welcome all of you. We're very pleased to have you giving your presentation tonight.
We're going to tell you about our purpose today. So could I have Nora, Camila, and Sierra stand next to me? We're going to start with Nora.
We, the students of Rick Marcotte Central School,
Formally request that the school driveway be officially named Detilio Drive.
today we will explain how we came to this decision.
First, we will describe our process. And I'm going to come over here. Mr. Quinn, could you come over here?
We named our hallways.
We formed a committee.
We voted. We brainstormed ideas.
We reported to our classes.
We voted.
And we had agreements that we had to follow. But before we could decide on the name for our city street, we had to do a lot of practice. So we decided to name our school hallways. And to do this, we learned about how city streets are named. We learned that sometimes a street is named after a person. Sometimes a street is named because it designates a certain part of our history. Sometimes a street is named for the people or the place that is in that area. And so we're going to tell you about how we named some of our hallways. We're going to start with our 6th grader. Come on over and you can talk about the street.
My street name that I chose is Central Boulevard because our school is named Central School.
I chose Library Lane because I love the library and the books.
I chose Kindness Corps because there's a kindness closet that kids can get snacks and supplies.
Marky Way was named Marky Way because our mascot is Marky Moose. Detilio Drive is in the front of our school, and Miss Detilio has been here for 44 years, and we love her. She has been here since my mom was born.
Whoa.
Oh, boy.
We named one of our hallways Somebody Street. It's because everybody is somebody at Rick Marcotte Central School. I chose Creative Creek because my favorite special area is art, and that hallway is where the art classroom is. I chose Snowy Day Way because Mr. Day is my favorite creative arts teacher. I chose Fifth Avenue because that's where the Zems is.
And what grade is in the Fifth Avenue hallway?
5th grade.
All right. So that's how we practiced. And then when we met with Mr. Connor, he told us, well, you have to follow some rules. So these are some of our agreements, and I'll just ask the students to help me explain what they understood about the rules around naming a street. So who can tell me why the street name has to be unique? Why is that very, very important? We'll start with Nora.
Because if it's not unique, our first responders can't get to it easily.
Very good. Is there another reason that the street name should be unique?
Because if the fire department needs or the policemen need to get to like our street, and it can't be anybody else's street in like the world.
In the world. That's right. How about South Burlington? In South Burlington. All right. Great job. All right. Why could we not name a street after a business? Why did we have to wait on that? All right, Camila.
So, for example, Starbucks. What if we named it Starbucks Road and like someone in the morning is tired and they need their Starbucks? Well, they're going to type in Starbucks and they might accidentally click on Starbucks Road. So then they're going to drive all the way to our school, but our school is not Starbucks.
So the GPS would take them to the wrong place. So we can't name it after a business. And then who can tell us about how long our street name could be or could not be? All right, Quinn, you want to come over and explain the rule around that, please?
Up to about 10 to 12 letters.
And who can tell me why? Sierra.
Because then it will not fit on the sign.
And so we did think of some names that were a little longer. How did we make the names fit on our signs? Katie.
By using abbreviations.
We learned about abbreviations so that we could fit on the sign. So we followed all of these agreements and we worked as a school committee. We had meetings. We brought our ideas to our school. We brought ideas to the committee and then we shared them with the school. And some of the names were really creative and unique, but they did not make the cut. And so we wanted to just tell you about a couple of names that we thought were fantastic, but we didn't think the city would appreciate them as much as we appreciated some of our ideas. So one of the first ones, let's go with Lil.
Principal Lane.
Yeah, they wanted to call the street Principal Lane. And I thought, let's call it something different. I didn't want a street named after me on that day. All right, Nora.
Courier Court.
There's a famous teacher, Mr. Courier, who's now our assistant principal. We thought only people in the school know about the Principal and Mr. Courier. So those wouldn't be the best names. What else, Sierra?
Pencil Street.
Pencil Street, because the school's there, right? There are lots of pencils. Quinn, come on over.
Moo Moo Drive.
Yes, the second graders like cows and they wanted to call a street Moo Moo Drive. That didn't follow the rules. And then finally, the fifth grade really, really wanted to call the street a certain name. Nora, do you remember what that name was?
It was Dustpan Drive because when the Zems were not ready yet, it was all dusty because of construction.
And how about the construction of the city? People said since kindergarten, we've been playing on a playground with a little bit of dust, but We didn't think that would be great because now there's no more dust because we have a beautiful city. Okay, we're going to get to our end here. These are some pictures of our committee at work. Finally, we came up with 3 final choices. They were Detilio Drive, Elementary Avenue, and Learners Lane. This is a copy of our ballot. Every student and staff member at our school got to vote, and our results are listed on the screen. And Finn, what was the result? Quinn, what was the result?
Detilio Drive winning with 71.4%.
So the majority of our voters decided that Detilio Drive would be the best name for our street. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about why. Our students have already said they love Mrs. Detilio. She's been our front office assistant for 44 years. I have a few notes. She has been the guiding light for our students, our families, and our staff for all this time. And we couldn't think of a better name for the street that guides everybody to Rick Marcotte Central School. We also would like you to know that her family is very community-minded. Her husband, Kenny, was the captain of the fire department. He was there for 36 years, and he also spent 25 years in the National Guard, where he is retired. Captain Brad, her son, is a captain of the fire department. He's been there for 22 years. Her daughter, Katie, is one of our first grade teachers. Mrs. Ransom, she's been there for 23 years. And daughter-in-law, Sarah, has been a member of the police department for 20 years. We believe that this is a perfect name for the driveway that leads to our school because of this family's community service. And we would ask that you please name our school driveway Detilio Drive. Thank you for listening, and now the committee will take questions.
Good. Well, thank you all. You can clap. Great. Well, that was clearly a very well thought out, organized process and presentation. Thank you so much for the information. So I'm going to first see if anyone on the commission has any questions, and then we'll see if anyone in the audience has comments or questions. Does anyone up here have any questions about the presentation?
Oh, terrific. It's by far and away the best street presentation we've ever had.
It is. It is.
Awesome job, guys.
Yeah. I guess I have one question. When you met with a committee, did you get a lot of questions from your class when you went back and told them about what the committee had talked about?
We'll go to Camilla.
Yep, we got a lot of questions, which was kind of annoying.
Well, what was one of the questions, Camila?
What's the street name?
They just wanted to go straight to the street name. Sierra, what did your class ask?
Where were you?
Where did you go for the committee meeting? It's really interesting when people meet with the principal. People are wondering why they're with me. Any other questions from your classmates? Did people want to name the street? Did people want to participate in the process and vote on something really important? Azalee? Yes. Quinn, that one's not on.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, let's see. So on our items, we do often open up for the audience if there's any comments or questions. Does anyone in the audience have any comments or questions? Go ahead. You want to come to the mic and state your name for the record?
My name is Tim Barrett. I'm chair of the City Council of South Burlington. I just want to know, did your committee meetings go very late at night?
We met kind of near dismissal.
During the school day, at the end of the day, the students got to leave their classrooms and meet for the committee work. And we did not have a meeting at night. This is our first night meeting.
Okay, lucky you. Other questions? Do I see another one over here? Okay,
I think,
Michael?
yeah, I think they've demonstrated that since they know how committee work works, have had experience with committee work, we have a bunch of future planning commissioners or city councillors here. You know how it works already.
Okay, I guess I have one question. You can raise your hand. Are all of you in support of this name? Okay, those are a lot of thumbs ups. Okay, great. I know there was only 71% on your pie chart, so I wanted to see if you were all in support. Wonderful.
Are you ready for a motion?
Sure.
Okay, well, I would move that we name the street that's to, I don't know what, is that south of this building? East of this building, Detilio, oh, okay. We adopt the name Detilio Drive for the road accessing the school property from the north side of Market Street.
I would second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any commissioner discussion on the motion?
I mean, it seems like most of our work has already been done for us. It looks like there's already a lot of consensus and the law wins this. So yeah.
Great. I know, Con, it's extremely helpful when we have a strong committee making a recommendation to us. We have other committees in the city that sometimes bring us information, and it really makes our job a lot easier. Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, what's Mrs. Detilio's first name?
Susan Detilio, and she is in the audience with her family members.
I understand the limitation of 10 to 12 letters. It's too bad, though, that you couldn't have her full name, Susan Detilio. But I guess that's not possible.
Right.
Before we vote, was staff, so we always like to make sure that staff is in agreement on kind of the legal part and for the emergency responders. So have we had to check?
Thank you for asking. And as the students talked about during their presentation, we worked with them during that time. They were very clear on all of the different rules that apply. And so all of the ones that were the finalists met all the requirements. There is no Detilio Drive nearby. And it's clear, and it's not a company name, so nobody's gonna accidentally try to get their coffee at Detilio Drive. So
Right, should we ask her if it's okay? She's here. I suppose if anyone named Detilio is against the idea, you could let us know before we make the vote. I don't need to put anyone on the spot though, so just want to make sure people know we're open to comments. Not seeing anyone raising their hand in the audience, so if we're ready, I think we could do the vote. Okay, all in favor of the motion to adopt the street name Detilio Drive, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and that was
Special vote.
unanimous, so I don't need to count the nays, so.
And Louis supports it here too.
7 commissioners, 1 dog voted in favor.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming. You really did all the hard work for us on this one. We really.
Thank you so much. Good job.
So just to describe what's going to happen next. So now this is official. This will be the name of this road right next to us here. So the next thing that's going to happen is that city staff is going to contact the post office and the state 911 board, who's then going to let Google know, and all the different groups, so that it in a couple months will show up on maps with that name. In the meantime, we're going to start making the sign for the street. And we have been working with our city manager, Jesse Baker, that will do a event when the actual sign is installed. So that'll be our next event, and we hope that everybody here is there for the actual installation of the sign. So that's where this goes from here.
Wonderful. Well,
Awesome.
thank you all, and to Susan DiTilio for all the amazing work. I mean, it's a real testament to the
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Very
welcome.
welcome.
Have a good school year.
Yes. Okay, so we can start to move on in just a second to our item number 7. We have a hand. Ryan, do you want to go ahead? I'm sorry if that was up. I must have missed it.
I just put it up a couple minutes ago. Thank you. Ryan Doyle. I was wondering if the city plans to continue the name consistently south of Market Street into the future, or has any plans about what we do when streets become contiguous or line up after the fact or are constructed in series, like is happening right now in City Center?
Good question, Ryan. And we do look at that. We have not gone that far with this street yet, but we do certainly look at contiguity, especially when we start numbering streets. There's different options about how to do that, whether we include a north and a south if there's a divider, or if we just continue the name. But under 911 rules, the numbers start at the beginning of the street and then go up. So that's what we would need to determine here.
Does this street as proposed Galway connect to Mary Street?
As right now, it exists from Market Street up to essentially just past City Hall. In concept, it continues north.
Mhm.
Of course, that won't happen as long as the school exists,
Mhm.
and it may never change.
Okay.
But in concept, if ever the school were to decide to do something, then it could continue north from there.
Gotcha.
Great. Okay, well, let's move on. And Brian, that was a great question. I think the context is often very important. So 7, we'll move on to the LDR amendments, potential recommendations to City Council on the minimum density and master plan requirements.
And let me just make a quick announcement that I didn't get a chance to do before. There are 4 counselors who are participating in the meeting, but because they're participating in your meeting, that is perfectly fine in the open meeting law. I'm just disclosing it for public purposes. They were here for the last item, but it didn't seem worthy of interruption at the time.
Okay, well, welcome counselors. Try not to discuss among yourselves. Okay, number 7.
Okay, so the next item here is LDR amendments, potential recommendation to City Council on minimum density master plan requirements. So Duncan or any other commissioners who were there last week, in brief, the council received the LDR amendments that you submitted. They took the action to warn a public hearing for September 16th. On the amendments as presented, with a couple of little technical tweaks that staff presented and that you'll get at your next meeting, but really just commas and stuff like that. And there was some discussion brought forward by a couple of counselors, Commissioner Matag, on the subject of minimum density master plan requirements. The council didn't take any formal action on it, but Councillor Smith, in making the motion to warn the public hearing, said that his understanding in making the motion was that when Jessica gives her presentation on the amendments on September 16th, that they'd love to hear some options around different ways that they could look at this subject. So no formal action is being sought from the planning commission, but I think that they are open and welcome to recommendations and ideas for how they might look at the subject of minimum density and master plan requirements. So that's a little bit of table setting. I've got a little side by side chart of what is in the existing regulations, what's proposed, and then some possibilities for you to chew on. You can make some of those discussions now. You also have one more meeting before the council presentation, so you don't feel like you need to think of everything on the spot right now if you'd like to continue your dialogue. So with that, I'll share it to the commissioners to have a discussion, and I'm here to provide resources for you.
Great. Well, thanks, Paul. We love charts, and this is a confusing subject. You know, I think the idea of minimum density on its own is kind of conceptually difficult. So seems like a good one to make sure we all both understand what's in there, and if that's really what makes sense.
I too would like to see this chart to kind of kick things off.
Yeah, seems like a great spot to start.
Drafting it, Paul.
Yeah.
Sure. So just a moment here while I get myself organized here. Try to zoom in too. Okay. So just to table set for you, there's I think 3 sections of the regulations that all intertwine here. And this is where this gets to be a little bit of a tricky subject, but I'm going to sort of walk you through each of those 3, and then what I think would be really helpful, because staff can help draft up whatever ideas and options you want to present. I think to the extent that commissioners can share outcomes that would be and or concerns, and then we can help you figure out some actual tools to implement them. But so first I'll speak about, I guess I'll go by subject areas. So there's 3 subject areas: planned unit developments, minimum density, and master plans. Those are the 3 intertwined subjects. Under the current regulations, i.e. the ones that were in effect prior to the council warrant and the public hearing, in the lower and medium density zoning, residential zoning districts, all parcels with more than 4 acres of developable land had to be a conservation PUD or traditional neighborhood PUD. If in some areas, specifically the southeast quadrant, the choice was only to be a conservation PUD. In some areas, it was only to be a traditional neighborhood, and in some areas, it was to do both. Where it was mandated to be a conservation PUD, which was the southeast quadrant neighborhood districts, there was an opportunity for a one-time carve-out of the PUD requirement for up to 2 acres. So instead of having to do a conservation PUD that conserves 70% of the land and at least, and built on up to 30% and planned for that, there was an exemption for a 2 acre carve-out. So that was the existing world of PUDs. I think I'm actually just going to go down the current regulations. I think that's going to be easier. So that was PUDs. Minimum density applied through PUDs. So remember, everything over 4 acres developable in residential districts needed to be a PUD. The traditional neighborhood had a minimum density of 4 or 8 units, depending on the size of it and its location. The conservation PUD in the areas that were the development portion of the property, 30% of the property, had a minimum of 4 units an acre. So that's where the minimums came in. Incidentally, your form-based code T3 also has that. The master plan, again, under the current regulation, any subdivision involving 4 or more acres, involving 2 or more phases of development taking place over more than 3 years, or anything that was a planned unit development, and anything where the DRB found that there was a clear potential for additional development, all of those were subject to a master plan for the entirety of the property.
To clarify, it needs to meet at least one of those criteria.
Any one of those criteria.
Okay.
Yeah. So in all of those cases, a master plan was required for the property, with the exception of the DRB could find a PUD less than 4 acres. They could find that it wasn't necessary, but otherwise it was mandated. Interestingly, the LDRs were silent on whether a master plan was required in the carve out of a conservation PUD. Nothing in the time that has been there reached that stage, but it looked like the DRB was trying to not have that have to apply to the carve out because it seemed to be consistent with the intent, but it was silent on it technically. So that's the current lay of the land. Under the draft regulations that were approved by the Planning Commission on July 30th.
Well, were there questions on that first? Do people generally understand what was in there? Or are there questions on what he said so far? Okay, good. Keep going.
Okay, yeah, please feel free to interrupt me at any point here. I know this gets technical, but at least it's not 300 pages of technical. It's just one. So under the draft that's been approved, there is no mandatory PUD anymore, as you know. The conservation PUD doesn't exist anymore. The traditional neighborhood is optional on properties of 4 or more acres. And the general PUD, which didn't have a minimum density, is optional for a variety of other circumstances. So PUDs are not mandated any longer.
And can you just remind me, what was the original motivation behind this entire slate of changes, getting rid of all this? Is this all this new state laws, is that it? Or were there other things at play?
The biggest component to it was the conservation PUD really became not very workable with the new state law.
Okay.
Because there was the transfer, when you conserve 70% of the land, you transferred the density to the remaining 30%. Now automatically under the new Act 47, all land that is served by water and sewer automatically gets a certain density. So
the conservation PUD, you'd essentially, there's no reason to go
right.
into it.
The only way to do it would have been for the commission to really upzone the remaining 30%, which would not have been consistent with the city plan to say, 4-story buildings and 40 units an acre in order to transfer the density from the other part. So it wasn't really workable to meet both the state law and the city's objectives. So under the state law, basically everything, the new state law, everything that could have happened before in the 30% now can happen automatically without having to transfer.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Sure.
So it almost makes it seem like under that PC approved draft, there should be an acknowledgement that the conservation PUD no longer exists, right? I mean, it makes sense to just have a blank space there, but like technically we actually removed it. It was a big change.
Yep.
that-
I was
to make
just focused
sure
on the things that are in it,
No,
but
I
certainly,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, what you had makes sense, but.
Question. Are there any examples of PUDs, general PUDs? Can you give some examples of neighborhoods that were done as PUDs?
Sure. So, prior to 2022 or so, when the city brought in the traditional neighborhood PUD and the conservation PUD, the old tool that existed for decades was just called a PUD, period. And it was essentially a waiver tool. So if you go back in history, the state law didn't used to specifically enable waivers of any standards. And so many communities, including our own, use PUDs as a way to authorize a setback waiver or a height waiver or whatever. And so many of the neighborhoods in the city built over the last 30 years and many of the commercial projects are PUDs of some form, even if it's one building on a property, because the tool was, a building on Shelburne Road was looking to have a 5-foot front yard setback for a variety of reasons. They became a PUD because that was the only tool available. South Village, South Point, Eastwoods, Eastwood Commons, yes, not the Eastwoods low scale neighborhood, but the Eastwood Commons whole neighborhood, Quarry Hill Road, basically all of pretty much everything for the last
Mm-hmm.
Dorset
Every-
Farms,
Everything that had any, I mean, those were generally higher density than the.
not necessarily. Dorset Farms is a largely single, 2, 3 family home neighborhood. Really, it's almost everything from the 80s onwards.
Yeah,
I
Village of
think
Dorset
Butler
Farm-
Farms might be the last neighborhood that was not a PUD.
Cider Mill.
Cider Mill 2, which is Edgewood, Oak Creek Village. Yeah, Oak Creek Village might predate it. I think that might have been one of the last ones that was before. So really, almost everything had been, and 10 years ago, the city started to reinvent what a PUD would be to be something not just a waiver tool, but something that directed a form of development. And so that's what led to the TND. That's what led to the conservation PUD. There was an exploration of some other ones, and then, as time marched on, the number of properties that were really available that would meet these has shrunk, and then Act 47 came in and changed some of that. So that's kind of how we got to where we are
Yeah.
today.
It seems as though we've now, basically, except for traditional neighborhood, we've eliminated PUDs, which I'm concerned that we've also eliminated a lot of potential for innovative communities. And now everything's gonna be about, lots of certain sizes, so
Right. Well,
it doesn't give you that same feel of a neighborhood.
Well, I think so. So the discussion that the commission had over the last couple of months on this was that due to the changes that you have brought forward and the state law, many of the things now baked into just standard zoning enable exactly that. And so by previously, a minimum lot size in many districts was 10,000, 12,000 square feet. And so in order to do something like South Village, one had to become a PUD to achieve it. Now you've created a circumstance where the allowable lot size is 5,000 square feet. And so that achieves all of that without having to be the process heavy component of a PUD. There's a built-in now waiver authority that is has criteria for the DRB for anything that is dimensional using the same review criteria. So it keeps the best components of it without having the structure of a PUD around that sort of surrounds it.
Is the DRB's ability to grant waivers, is that new then?
It's been so over the years, it's been inserted into various areas. In this set of amendments, it's consolidated into one set of criteria. So it has existed over time. It was built in for heights, and then it was built in for setbacks. And now it's been put into one set of criteria that applies consistently.
So is that waiver 40 similar in scope to the original general PUD ability to act as waivers?
I would say it's similar in scope, but more directed. So part of the reason that the commission years ago decided to get rid of the old PUD was that there was almost no criteria of review. It was the board can grant flexibility in exchange for innovation. And that's it. There was no further guidance, which put some difficulties on all parties for predictability, which is what the courts asked for. So what has been built in since then is some criteria of review so that the courts have repeatedly said that when there's flexibility in a regulation or just generally in a regulation, when an application is submitted, all parties should have a reasonable expectation of what the outcome is going to be, whether it's the applicant or neighbors or others. And so have something like we used to have that just said, if you're innovative, you get flexibility is nice in some ways, but it doesn't really meet that standard that the courts have set of some level of predictability.
Gotcha. Because that old system almost meant the DRB could kind of do what they wanted if they felt if they liked the PUD.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we have a very professional volunteer DRB, just as you all are, who take their job very seriously.
Yes, absolutely.
But it was always open to that potential or that criticism or somebody making that claim, even if they are.
No, I'm not trying to criticize DRB. I'm trying to understand it was a very broad authority they were granted.
But a developer can still choose to do a TND.
They can.
Even though it's very prescriptive, but there's a benefit that if they comply with the prescriptive regulations of a TND, it's less onerous when they go before the DRB.
Correct. And there is the, specificity has a benefit too. If somebody chooses to be a TND now, then a developer both knows what they need to submit, and also if ultimately the developer is challenged by folks who are not happy with the decision, then they have our regulations to back them up in a court proceeding of, I just did what the regulations told me to do, which is, that can sometimes be a benefit.
Yep.
Paul Ingles has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Paul?
Paul Connor. It's my understanding that the PUDs were originally federal directives and directives specifically to have housing developed near transportation routes and services. And is that correct?
I think that's probably accurate, Paul. I think, it's one of these things that the concept initially was exactly what you describe of create tools for municipalities to be nimble and flexible as in a changing world. And I think in Vermont, because our variance criteria, which is the other way that somebody can get an adjustment from the rules, is an extremely high bar. In Vermont, it's almost impossible to get a variance. Municipalities, as a Dillon's Rule state, started using the PUD as a tool to grant waivers, which isn't necessarily the same thing as what Paul was describing as the original purpose. So this is some of our sort of returning to, and I think, the other thing I'd say is that I think in the planning community, a lot of the discussion in recent years has been, if you know what you want, just zone what you want, rather than creating an exception and a large process to do a thing. Just make it the thing that you can do, which is essentially what a lot of these new regulations do.
Right.
By allowing smaller lot sizes, the building types, etc. So rather than having to be the exception to the rule, it just becomes the rule.
Right.
Donna?
And a little while ago, you said that it became, a vehicle for waivers, basically. And I always kind of wondered how we wandered so far afield from the idea of transportation routes and access to services. That we're building PUDs, out where, where Cider Mill is, or, really quite far away from transportation routes and services.
Yeah.
But
I
that's
think, like I
because
said, Paul, I think it's, I wasn't here at the time, even though I've been here a really long time. I think
Yeah.
in South Burlington and in many communities, it's because there was no other tool for flexibility. And that sort of became the default flexibility tool.
Yeah,
Donna?
I think at this point, I feel like I almost have to start going to DRB meetings to figure out how this is going to play out. Because I just kind of have a sense that maybe that's because I don't have that much experience in planning commission, but I get a sense that we're going to have a lot of cookie cutter buildings, because we have, it seems like a very prescriptive approach of a certain size lot and certain setbacks and everything like that. Without a lot of flexibility, we're going to end up with cookie cutter neighborhoods. And, and certainly the multifamily, we've heard it's like, oh, this is the perfect, we need a 12 unit building that we can, put them down, in a row so that we can have, these affordable buildings and everything. But I'm like, well, you can have more flexibility than just having all the same buildings. And that's only my concern. I don't know that that's going to happen, but that's my concern. And just looking at how inflexible these rules are right now, that we're going to end up with neighborhoods that maybe aren't what we want.
Okay. I guess I don't see the rules as being inflexible, especially with the TND being optional, but certainly that's your decision to make.
I don't know. I mean, I want to see how it plays out, and I'd like to hear designers, kind of, what their experience is in working with the rules, or maybe there is no need for a designer anymore because we're just going to have cookie cutters. you know, on, 5,000-foot lots.
I guess my response, I mean, I guess at least in my opinion, at least from what I've read on the the traditional neighborhood codes, that it requires a variety of different buildings and civic spaces, and not to call it a specific development, but I've noticed a lot not necessarily in South Burlington, a lot of areas where there's very loose zoning codes. I feel like that almost leads itself more to cookie cutters. It could these huge developments to just have single family home, single family home, single family home, single family home, and just nothing besides that. And I feel like if anything, that traditional neighborhoods developments, by requiring different densities and civic spaces, I feel like that almost does the opposite. Like I feel like developers tend to gravitate towards as cookie cutter as possible because it makes it simple, predictable, and often cheaper that way. I guess again, I'm a kind of fan of these traditional neighborhood developments. I feel like by mandating different types of densities that you need within it and civic space and stuff, I feel like that almost makes it more less cookie cutter. Like the South Village one, am I correct? That's the one that's on Spear Street.
Yep.
Like I remember going past that, and like when I first was going up, I'm like, wow, I'm really impressed. This is kind of a cool new development. It's got like lots of different things going on, and like, wow, it's very indicative of this developer for doing this. And we're thinking, oh wait, it's a T&D, right? Or is it the old, or is it a general? Which one is that?
Predated that.
That was under the old, just
okay.
The old version of a PUD, and I think that was an example of when a developer has a vision and used the flexibility in the old regulations to the benefit of design.
Right.
And different developers have different angles. That one was somebody who looked to say, how can I achieve the outcome of a lot of variety using the flexibility, which is not necessarily how everybody used it, but that's how that one did.
And would that type of development still be feasible under the new regulations?
In looking at the lot sizes in there vary from about 5,500 square feet up to about half an acre. So yes, that variety could happen. The civic spaces are included. So broadly speaking, that is what that kind of thing is what the regulations are striving for, even without a PUD now.
Okay.
So I think, our real focus is on this minimum density piece of the puzzle.
Sure.
That's
So
what we
can I
got the
keep going down
question
through there?
on. Yeah.
So we talked about PUDs, where they're mandated and where they're not mandated. Under the regulations that were warned for public hearing, remember that PUDs are now optional. So previously, minimum density came through PUDs because they were mandated. Under this draft, minimum density would apply to any subdivision of 2 or more acres, where they have to demonstrate that there's adequate space for between 4 to 8 units an acre. That demonstration has to include showing the space for minimum density, right of way, streets, civic space, and stormwater. Minimum supply and density, if you're going to be a traditional neighborhood, that's an option. And then I think an important component of this is where master plan is required in the draft regulations. So the minimum density itself is just a demonstration of density. It's not a planning tool. It's just a number. The master plan in the draft regulation is required for any major subdivision of 2 or more acres, constructed over 2 or more phases or 3 or more years, and when there is a clear development potential. So very similar to the other one. To the old one, it's 2 acres instead of 4 acres, and it does not include the PUDs because not every PUD would there's some tiny PUDs. There's a one-time carve-out of the master plan requirement now, so similar to the conservation, but it's under master plan. For a property of up to 2 acres, when you have a 4-acre parcel to begin with. And so in that case, I don't know what I just did. Teams is starting up for no reason on my computer. There's no master plan required for that 2-acre carve-out, nor for the balance of the property at the time of that 2-acre carve out. But if somebody then decides that they want to do something with the remainder, then they're subject to a master plan. So in hearing some of the feedback that go ahead.
Even if the remainder is only 2 acres.
If the remainder is 2 acres, then it would still be subject to a master plan under the draft, yeah. So some of the feedback that I think that we've heard a little bit about was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, in interpreting what you had shared, may be a question about the onerousness of a master plan more so than the minimum density. But
Both.
okay. So that's the lay of the land as it stands now. So a master plan is required for everything that is more than 2 acres of development. A subdivision involving more than 2 acres of land, construction of over 2 or more phases, and 3 or more years. And when there's clear additional development potential, there is a one-time carve-out available for larger properties of up to 2 acres. Otherwise, a master plan is required, and that master plan has to show conceptually how open space lot layout streets would take place. It is not a full design, but it is a demonstration of how a development would be laid out. For the when there's the carve out, there's the demonstration that the remainder of the property can still be built on, which is not the same thing as a master plan. That's what we would call a yield plan, which just shows you've shown conceptually at, you know, that this area of land could, you know, here's a concept for a loop road. This is how you could conceptually achieve 8 units an acre, and then it's done. So it's a lot less than a master plan, but it is still a demonstration that you've not boxed yourself into a corner.
So let me just run through a scenario and let me see if I'm trying to understand Michael's objection. So if I've got 4 acres, I'm carving out 2. There's no master plan required for those 2 acres.
Right.
Ever. I've got to show that the 2 acres I'm developing does not prohibit further development of those other 2 acres at some point. In other words, I can't stick the houses right in the right of way.
Right. And you'd have to show for those remaining 2 acres, the 2 acres that you're not carving out,
yep,
that you could achieve 4 units an acre on those. And you might have to show like, oh, here's a lollipop road that would serve that. It's not a master plan, but you'd have to show conceptually how it could be done.
It's quite onerous though. I mean, the rules are that demonstrated residential density must show and take into account any required rights of way, streets, stormwater practices, and required civic space, as well as the site features such as Article 12 resources that's must also be included in preliminary and final subdivision plans or plats. Having to do that means you really have to hire somebody, an engineer, or to figure that out. It's almost like a master plan.
And that's for the that's not for the acres that it's a carve out. That's for the other 2 acres.
That's for the
Right.
rest.
So
The rest of
right,
the rest of the
right.
land.
So in your
Okay.
example, it was
Yeah.
2 acres, but let's
Yeah.
say it was a
Okay.
20-acre parcel of which 2 are being carved out.
Mhm.
So the demonstration that Michael alluded to would apply to the 18 acres. It's not a master plan, but it is some level of work to show what can be done on this.
Mhm.
But a layperson couldn't do it, Paul. You'd have to have a professional figure this out.
Right. And
So I guess I have a question about this, Michael. Are you only opposed to having to show the minimum density in the case of a carve out? Or are you,
Not in the 2-acre carve-out.
right, so the 2-acre carve out does not have to meet any of
right,
these.
doesn't mean,
It'd have to meet a basic subdivision. You have to show that it's accessible because that's state law, but beyond that.
I think
So-
you didn't say my question right. So in a regular subdivision of 2 acres, we're not talking about the carve out now, just somebody's coming in, they have a 3-acre lot and they want to develop it. In what we passed on, it requires the minimum density of this 4 or 8 units per acre. Is that what you're opposed to? Like,
No, I'm not opposed to a minimum density of 4 units per acre in the part of the property that's going to be developed. I'm opposed to the fact that then you have to also show, let's say it's three acres out of a 10-acre lot. Then you have to show how you're going to build the remaining 7 acres. But I don't want to build the remaining 7 acres. I want to farm them. Or plant a forest. Or
So
like hay.
I guess trying to further what Jessica's asking.
I'm objecting to a couple of things. One, we didn't really have time to consider this carefully because it came upon us at the end of the meeting at which it was introduced. And I think it's an imposition on a landowner to tell them what they must do. They must do. Forcing them to do this doesn't seem right to me at all.
so I still don't understand. So in the case that someone's coming in and they want to develop their 3 acres, all the buildable area.
This is a 3-acre parcel.
It's
you're talking about.
no, well, it could be a 6-acre parcel, but 3 is wetlands. This is my example. Okay, 6-acre parcel, 3 acres is wetlands. You're not going to develop it. So you've got 3 developable acres and they're coming in and going to use it.
And those 3 developable acres, I'm suggesting the minimum should be 4 units per acre.
Okay, so you are not opposed to minimum density as a concept. You're okay with minimum density
I have
as
a
a
problem with minimum
concept.
density as a concept because it doesn't allow for innovative and free development of a person's land. But I'm willing to live with it, provided we don't impose rules and restrictions on the owner for the remainder of his land or her land.
So am I understanding right? The chief objection is, say you have a 10-acre parcel, you want to build one house on that, right? And you want to do that 2-acre carve out. Is your chief objection just the cost to build the plan about how the other acres could be used, or do you have another objection as well?
Talking about one home on how many acres?
Well, it's 2, right? That we're allowing up to 2.
The carve out.
No, because if you don't have some kind of minimum density, you're going to have sprawl.
If
he builds one house on his 3 acres.
But are you currently allowed to over 4 because you have to carve out? Sorry, yeah. What are you?
Michael, can I try to interpret what I think you're saying?
You can try.
Setting aside the carve out, I think what you're saying is, let's say somebody had 30 acres of land. Today in 2024, they have an idea and a vision for building 6 of those 30 acres. But they don't want to do anything with the remaining 24 acres. That's your concern, is the remaining 24 acres. You're not, while you philosophically may have problems with density within the 6 acres, you're willing to live with it. It's the question of having to master plan out the other 24. Does that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Should be
okay.
free to do with the other 24 whatever they want.
So-
Not whatever they want, but
Well, I thought we had
they
that
need-
because
it's undeveloped. They could leave it undeveloped, leave it wild. They could conserve it. They could farm it. There's lots
They
of
could
options.
sell it.
Ultimately, they could develop.
Yes,
well, I thought we
Or
talked
the
about
next
this,
door,
that, so wasn't, I mean,
there's nothing, can I make
Yeah.
a point that Helen reminded me? There's nothing that would prevent a future owner or the same owner from developing that remaining 24 acres or another piece of that 24 acres, submitting the same master plan for just what he wants to build, but not be forced to do it.
So maybe I just understand the reason for doing this whole, what kind of plan is it called? It's not master plan, it's,
There's a yield plan is the sort of
Yeah,
word
so
we're using.
my understanding is like, if like someone were to say do a 6-acre parcel or something and say a 10-acre
Yep.
lot of land, that they could make some weirdly shaped 6-acre parcel that would make it functionally impossible to develop the rest of the land with due to setback requirements or slope or whatever. My understanding of the reason for this is to prevent that from happening. Like, what would your response like? Are you okay with that? Like someone making a weird jagged 6-acre make everything undevelopable, or
If they're dumb enough to do that, that's their problem.
Going
It's our problem.
right, going back in history,
But I think that's overstated. A development.
right, I
Yeah,
mean,
there's a question of topography. Where is the road on which serves this particular property? You can't just, you could try, but I don't think a property owner would try to do that. And we could certainly develop language for the DRB that the development has to be cited in such a way that it doesn't preclude future development on the remainder.
So I think that there's a couple things here, and fundamentally, I think you're talking about the value or lack thereof of a master plan. There's a yield plan, there's a master plan, but fundamentally there's similar tools that look to the future. The city didn't used to have a master plan. The master plan was brought in about 2002, midway through the development of the golf course, because the golf course was originally proposed as one proposal, and then later owners took over and said, well, what if we add a neighborhood over here and a neighborhood over here and a neighborhood over here? And the city had no tool to say, wait a minute, how are you looking at the whole? Because we have roads and water and sewer that we need to understand the entirety of what you're doing. It has evolved into something where developers can understand phasing of projects. So the DRB has tools to say, when does this piece need to be built? When does this road need to be connected? That kind of thing.
But for Colin, eliminating the minimum density doesn't prevent or impede the landowner from developing the land.
Oh, no, I'm not.
To the extent that he is allowed.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But I guess the question is that what we want to want? 'Cause that's the whole point. We're trying to limit sprawl. And if we allow if someone wants to build on like, oh, I just want to have a few houses, kind of estates in a large lot, even if we have a minimum density, if we don't have this requirement to show the restaurant developable, you could definitely essentially gerrymander your way to property lines to allow you to skirt the minimum density requirement. So,
but you won't get sprawl if there's a minimum density of 4.
But you could though, because
you
someone could draw some very weird property lines.
You'd have to be pretty bloody.
I mean, yeah, but
So, okay, well, Duncan's had his hand up for quite a
Raise
while.
his hand.
So let's go to
Um,
Duncan and then.
So I guess what I'm hearing, Michael, is you're not comfortable with the onerous process of requiring the master plan on that extra acreage or yield plan.
Yep.
But there's sort of two sides of the story, but also we have a limited amount of developable land. So I think that there needs to be some sort of safeguard to say that, what Colin was just talking about doesn't happen, or trying not to have it happen, where that land is rendered undevelopable because of where a house was put. But the question I guess I have to Paul is there a tool that is not as onerous as what Michael is, against, that we could use that would still accomplish the goal of making sure that that land could be developable in the future?
Sure. So I guess, Jessica, can I?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I mean-
think that's good. Can we hear from Paul? Is that okay? Or,
No, but if you drive around the countryside here, you'll see that sort of thing has happened. Somebody has a big field, they plonk a house right in the middle and then mow the rest. We don't want that.
Right.
So
yeah.
if you,
That's your point.
if
I
you
think
have-
that was what
yeah,
Duncan was
if you have
saying.
a minimum of 4 acres,
All can
I I guess I'd also like to make the statement, I don't think anyone is saying every inch of land should be developed. Like if someone wants to conserve or farm or donate to a park, I think we want to make sure that that's allowed and not made so complicated.
Allowed,
Some
not
way
further
to keep open
first.
space in the option that someone.
But I know from the meeting we had the other day that the council was interested in hearing from you when you present to them, what are the other options in this avenue? Are there other things we could do that wouldn't be as onerous on the property?
Yeah.
But still achieve the goal that we're looking
Yeah.
for.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so along those lines, I reviewed what Michael had to share about the eliminating the minimum density. I think the challenge there is that does not eliminate the requirement to do the master planning. You don't have a density, but you still have to do a master plan. So I'm not sure that achieves your goal, Michael.
yeah, you have to do a master plan for the 3 acres that you're going
Right,
to
but
develop.
if you just eliminate density and you don't do anything else, you still have to master plan the other 24 acres, which I don't think is what you're trying to achieve,
Why?
because the master plan is required. So unless you
That-
change something else,
I'm saying you only require a master plan for the portion of the property that you're going to
Right,
develop,
heard,
not
I'm
for
just,
the remainder.
the text that you shared didn't have that part of it. That's all I'm saying.
Oh.
So an option that staff was kicking around is assuming that you believe that the master plan has a value to it. Because we have had developers of various forms who are not necessarily interested in long-range planning for their property. They just want to do one property at a time. Assuming that there's still a value to a master plan. One idea that we wanted to kick around was it's not formally stated in the regulations that you could have undesignated land. So if you chose to permanently conserve a portion of your property, then I'm certain that the DRB would consider that that's an acceptable way to do your master plan. I think the challenging part that you're wrestling with is what if that person who has a 30-acre parcel, they know what they want to do with 6, they're not ready, they want to farm the remaining 24 for now, but they don't want to tie the hands of their kids in 20 years. I think that's the problem that you're trying to wrestle with. So one option that we had for you to consider, or the council to consider, is you could formally write into the master plan requirements that somebody could designate an undesignated portion of their land. So for these 24 acres, we are calling it undesignated. You could have either very limited rules for that section to just show that it's accessible, or you could have this yield plan apply to that. But you otherwise would have no requirement to master plan that portion of it that you're not ready. In staff's opinion, you would need some kind of a safeguard in there to make sure that somebody's not taking advantage of that to 6 months later come in and say, now I'm going to master plan 1/3 of another acre, and now I'm going to master plan this, because it does happen. We would suggest that a tool that could be applied is master plans are valid for 10 years. So you could have a tool that says you can leave it undesignated. And for the duration of that master plan, which is 10 years, it must stay undesignated. And then after that time, at your when you get a new master plan, then you could choose to add those 24 acres in, but you're making a commitment. If you truly don't have a vision for the next 10 years of development, that's perfectly fine, but you can't come in 6 months later and say, now I have a vision for it. So that would be one suggestion of an option that might meet.
Why 10 years?
That's the duration of a master plan.
Yeah, that means you have to do it every 10 years.
And that's currently in the regular,
Well-
master plans expire after 10 years.
Yeah, but if you're done developing, if you did it.
Right, if you did it, you're done.
Don't need to,
Right.
you don't need to come back in and you
Right,
you
and-
now have your thing you built and you have your undesignated land that's open and you're done.
And
There's
remember
no
the
redo.
Do you have to come back and re-identify the undesignated land every 10 years?
No.
I mean, if you don't, if you decide not to build on it,
Oh.
then you're not done. If you've only half built the part that you wanted to build on, let's say you only built 3 of your 6 acres, you would need to re-up your master plan and you'd say, I'm still leaving it undesignated. So you could choose to do that. But so that's an option that we wanted to float to you.
But I'm confused about that. So
Yeah.
you designate those 24 acres undesignated. 10 years later, you don't do anything, master plan expires, that land is, what happens then? That's the part.
It's still, I mean, it basically goes back to what it was before, which is that it still has no designation. It just doesn't have an.
But you don't have to come in and say, I'm gonna designate it, undesignated again for another 10 years. No.
It would only be if you want to develop.
Only if you wanted to develop that piece, or if you, for whatever reason, had not finished the development portion of your property.
All right.
So, imagine South Village. South Village, for a variety of reasons, 15 years to build. They could have said phase 3 was undesignated. So they, in theory, so let's say they came in and they did, they got their master plan, they did phase 1 and phase 2, and then phase 3 was undesignated. 10 years later, maybe they haven't built phase 2 yet. So they'd re-up the master plan, get reapproval for phase 2, and they could still leave phase 3 undesignated, or they could say, now we're ready to do phase 3. The reason for a master plan expiring is one, forever is a very long time. So if something's approved for development for decades, that could, maybe the city policies want to change in the future. Also, the master plan now vests you under the rules that you applied under. So the benefit of doing a master plan for developer is they get predictability for a decade. But maybe 10 years from now, we say, we're expanding our habitat blocks, and maybe something that you got approval for 10 years ago doesn't get to forever stay in place.
So it's sort of grandfathers you in for 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So Helen has her hand up.
So I have a question that goes back to some language that you suggested and that I think Duncan mentioned, and that is we want to avoid someone plopping their 3 houses in the middle of the entire parcel in a way that doesn't allow
Future access.
Can't hear Helen.
And development. So
I think your mic is off.
Oh, I'm sorry. We mentioned some, or I think you mentioned some language that I think is also needed, that makes it clear that when you have your, I think it's great with the undesignated area, but I think we want to make sure that when you do subdivide your large parcel, the subdivision isn't right in the center, which would, unless the parcel's really huge, I guess, which would preclude any future owner or yourself to develop other portions of the land. I would agree that we don't want someone to come in with the master plan and these are where or some modified master plan, this is where the streets could be and blah, blah, blah. But I do think we want to make sure that there is the option for future development, as well as the option of the owner saying, I want to undesignate it because I don't want to develop it. And I might want to permanently conserve it or make it a park or whatever it is that they are, a farm. And they don't know what they want to do with it quite yet. So is there language we could, maybe I'm the only one who thinks we need some language. And
No, I
Paul, maybe you need to tell me we don't need that, but is there something that will, again, be simple?
I think that's what this yield plan is trying to achieve. And
Okay.
maybe you want to look at some revisions to it, but that's when Michael listed off at the beginning, demonstration of streets, open space, natural resources, and stormwater and civic space, that those can still be accommodated. That's what that's trying to achieve, exactly that.
Okay.
If the commission feels like we should provide maybe some other options that tip a little bit more on the scale of a little bit more work or a little less work, that's certainly what we can provide, but that's what it's trying to achieve. And I think you're basically trying to figure out where do you want to tip between knowing that, making sure that somebody hasn't closed off options for the future while not making it too onerous for them to do so. And I think that's this, basically this conversation.
I definitely want to make it less onerous, but I also want that clarity.
With those safeguards.
Yeah. Whatever the safeguards,
I-
might be, and maybe I just don't understand the yield plan as well as I should.
mean, I like the idea of making it as simple as possible. I guess I am like, I mean, for example, in theory, the idea of having some like geometrical rule saying if you can do it here, then just trying to make it simple. I guess it's just when you have stuff like wetlands and slopes and right of ways, I'm not sure.
Those are not developable areas.
But yeah, but you need to make sure that you can access it, right?
Yep.
And isn't that all we're kind of trying to do here? We're not trying to make like extremely skinny and stuff like that too. I mean, I guess I guess I might. It's like, Michael, do you have a specific idea for a type of requirement that would preserve these ideas to make sure it's developable, but it could be something that some layperson could quickly do without having an extensive plan? I guess, like, what would this
My,
onerous idea look for you?
I think that we need a tool which includes the designation of land as undesignated. For the developer, the part of the property that the owner wants to develop, to avoid sprawl, have a minimum of 4 units per acre, and have language that the siting and layout of this development must be done in such a way as to allow access to the undesignated land.
But isn't that what we're proposing already, or how is that different?
No, there's no undesignated land in our current rule.
Oh, yes, okay, fair. Yeah, I hear that.
Okay, so it sounds like, you know, Paul up on the screen here has this red language that I think is very similar to what you're talking about, Michael, but I think right now, you know, it would allow for this undesignated, you know, that could be farm, it could be, you know, it's whatever it is. And then
That should be, the last sentence is not 10 acres, it should be 10 years, right?
Yes,
It says
sorry,
10 years.
10 years.
yeah, okay, so this isn't perfect language, but yeah.
Oh, the last one.
Right, this isn't
And
LDR
then-
language, it's,
And then I think, so that seemed, I didn't hear any objection to that, this idea that someone could leave part of their property undesignated. Just that seemed like generally a good idea. But then I think what we're wrestling with now is these 2 sub options. We have sub option 1, which is essentially the yield plan, which may be too much. And then we have this other option of just saying, you have to be able to get from the developed part into the rest of the land in the case that you want to do something.
Yeah.
So I think that's where maybe, I mean, Helen, I think you were saying, maybe there needs to be some other language of some kind other than just saying you have to stick a road stub out there.
Yeah,
So that's
mean-
kind of where we're at. Like, what are the things that they need to show?
Siting and layout would have to avoid hazards and level 1 resources anyway. And by the same token, that would have to be cited and laid out in such a way that there's access to, in Paul's case, those other 24 acres, even though they're undesignated. And that's a simple, the master plan then is only for the developed area, the 6 acres.
Right, only for the developed
And
part.
the other undesignated 24 acres is undesignated.
so as a, just a, for instance, use a hopefully fairly simple example. Let's say, 30-acre parcel, 6 acres being developed. Somebody shows that the remaining 24 acres are there and they're touching a street, but there's a big wetland that is between the street and the remainder of that land, such that in the future, they'd have to ask for the DRB for an allowance to cross a wetland for that road. Would that be something that the board should be looking at the time of that 6 acres to say, wait a minute, we don't want to be put into a corner where we have to allow a wetland crossing to access the rest of the property? I think that's what this is,
Uh-huh.
in some version of this, trying to say, well, you know, if you laid out your 6 acres a little bit differently, you never had to cross a wetland to begin with in 10 years.
Mhm.
Trying to figure out, you know, where do you draw that line of how much should be known now when you have the opportunity before you cut up the land?
Yeah, I also wanted out, does it say here someplace that this only applies to low scale residential? Or is
Yes.
this also potentially multifamily and commercial? Because I mean,
Originally, this was residential density.
is this the only residential? Is that all this applies to?
No, this applies across the board.
Because I mean, I have personal experience working on a project that the same thing happened. They had a piece of property that it was all commercial. There was no residential on it, but they wanted to develop a hotel. They started developing it with all surface parking, you know, never really had a master plan for the whole thing. And then it came down to they had 3/5 of the land left, or just a little more than half the land left. And they wanted to put 70% of the allowable commercial square footage on that remaining land, which was really hard to do at that point.
So master plans have been done
So,
recently.
I mean,
One-
they didn't have a master plan
Right,
that
so
covered what they wanted to do.
One's
on
been
that
done and
property.
approved for what is for the Larkin Terrace area now. So that was approved this past year, where they laid out the rest of how they would deal with the Farrell Estate, well, not the former Farrell Estate up along Shelburne Road and Old Orchard Park. So that's an example of that one. The airport is coming in for their first ever master plan next week to the DRB with the next decade's worth of projects that they're looking to do, so that they're seeing how the puzzle pieces fit together. So there are certainly some strong benefits to the puzzle pieces.
I mean, and
No, no,
even,
no.
even though
And-
commercial development, I mean, it changes. I mean, it changes over time, you know, so 10 years is nothing
Right.
in a commercial development and everything.
Nick mentioned Eastwood's neighborhood. That was almost entirely commercial on its initial submittal.
Wait a
on
minute,
Farrell Street.
So,
just for you, the title of Article 15A08G is minimum residential density.
well, now that we now have 3 residential, we have high scale commercial residential. So that's still residential, which includes a lot of commercial as well. So, you know, it seems logical.
But I think the question was, does a master plan apply in commercial areas? And I think that's what Paul was saying.
So,
A
yes.
master
And
plan,
it really applies. in commercial
apply,
areas.
but the residential minimums don't apply to a commercial development. The minimum density.
I
It's
don't know.
different.
It depends
It-
on how much residential you're trying to get out of a, mixed use development. I mean, you have these targets for residential units. I would think that you
We're
really,
talking about
you'd-
pure commercial. A pure commercial development would
well, yeah,
need the minimum residential density.
no, I mean, but none of these things that we're talking about are gonna be pure commercial. This is all some mixture.
Right. I think as proposed, if somebody's proposing a residential component, then it needs to include a minimum density.
Duncan?
I was just trying to summarize. So it sounds like we're certainly in favor of something less onerous than the master plan for Michael, but something that has some safeguards to make sure that the property is not precluded from future development by poor planning. So I don't know if that's a yield plan or if you can tweak it so that Jessica has some options to give the council.
I would,
Do you,
Well,
Paul, do you think there's an option to say something about like massing of land, so you don't like an undesignated portion should be contiguous or be, have a clear access plan that wouldn't impact resources or like, it feels like
So-
there could be some criteria that's listed without necessarily needing to hire like a civil engineer to go through and actually draw out.
So what
all
you're
that
saying is sort of rather than going by the specific things of density, stormwater, streets and civic spaces, use a proxy to say, you know, if you make it a big square that has no resources in it, you can probably achieve all these things.
Yeah.
Like something that is that allows to a very basic demonstration that you don't have, you know, the wetland right at the front, or that you've left these weird sinuous points, or that
Yeah. Something
or that
like
you've
that. So,
forced.
you know, I think the idea being that you wouldn't want your small amount you're developing now plopped in the middle necessarily, like with no access to some spots. And I mean,
Could you have potentially a situation like in terms of like trying to think comes kind of like, I like the idea of like some kind of geometrical rule to sort of simplify things, though I can't necessarily think of a geometrical rule that would hit all use cases. So maybe saying you could either submit a like a yield plan, or B, say the undesignated area must be able to, I don't know, you must be able to draw a circle that is at least half the space of the undesignated portion, or some like kind of geometric kind of rule or something like that. That's just a complete like random idea I threw out there, but some way that you can just sort of, just do some napkin math to comply in this way. But if you got a weird situation where the napkin math doesn't really work, also give the yield plan as another option, maybe. I like that even striped circles because they kind of are they're simple and they stop them breaking up parcels too much. But I don't know if that's also too complicated. I don't know.
Could we just use a right of way as being the access?
I mean, my main concern is that I'm worried what someone's going to do is, you got this nice big 10-acre square parcel. Let's put these weird little fingers in that are like each only half an acre, and put the house right at the very end of them, and have this kind of giant E-shaped plot around them. So it's like, if I want to build a big bunch of like several acre estates,
But you're screwing up your own land.
But if your goal isn't about your own land, your goal was, I want to live on a 5-acre estate and have no one else use that and have a giant lawn there. This is how you were trying to kind of avoid that, is my understanding, with this whole yield plan. But if you do that, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that have a whole bunch. It's not technically their land. It's this weird undesignated parcel, parcel it off, but like it de facto becomes your backyard, and you de facto have an estate, even if you don't own it. You still got like acres and acres of privacy on all sides, but then that land can't really be used for anything else. I mean, that's my
really convoluted mind.
But I'm trying to think about someone.
Well, I know what you mean, but you can't live on 5 acres if you do that.
Yes, you totally can. I mean, I know tons of people who like have a right of way or something, or old property isn't theirs, but no one's using it to de facto become as part of your land. Like, I'm trying to think like a developer here.
Okay, but can I ask Paul whether this is feasible for you staff to draft a plan which includes the undesignated land tool, the minimum density of 4 units per acre for the part of the parcel that the owner wants to develop, and language either which would prevent the owner from parking his or her development in such a way that it blocks access to the undesignated land. The DRB would, we need to make the language, write the language that siting and layout of the development must be such that there is a right of way, call it 50 feet for all I care, which gives you access to the remaining 24 acres in your example.
I think we can take a shot at it, Michael. I think that there are some examples that show what you don't want to achieve. There are some 10-acre parcels, for example, on Highland Terrace that face eastward that are super narrow, one house wide. There's wetlands back there, so it historically isn't the end of the world, but had it not been wetlands, it is basically inaccessible behind it. And at the time, somebody wanted 10-acre parcels, but That's very difficult.
Could we?
The orchards neighborhood for different reasons is challenging. You know, there's the inner orchards and the outer orchards, and they're almost not connected at all. And so had they been developed as a master plan, ideally at a minimum, the first phase of that in the 50s when it was built would have had road stubs
Would have made
to
more
connect to
sense.
the outer orchards. And that wasn't done, but that's part of what's trying to be achieved here. And then there's some commercial ones like off Meadowland Drive. There's some pretty inefficient use of land
Jessica?
that a master planning or some yield plan would sort of make it so that the back part of that property should still be accessible.
Paul Engels?
Yeah, Paul Connor, you've told us in the past that there's very few properties like this. Do you have a sense of how many there are?
On the residential side, I know that there are about 10 to 12 properties over 10 acres in size. I don't know the number more than 4 acres. What I can say is also of the approximately 10,600 acres of land in the city, about 8% of that is both developable and unbuilt. So what is that? That's about 700 acres, which sounds like a lot, but is not very much in the grand scheme of the whole city. So I don't know the number of parcels, but it's in that neighborhood.
And that includes the land that the university owns,
Yes.
which is a whole nother conversation about.
Right, which
whatever
this
they
doesn't really touch very
ever
much
do
of that.
With that, yeah, or can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's smaller.
Just want to add one.
Donna, and then
Just
we'll hear
wanted
from
to
Paul.
add one thing. I basically agree with what Michael's saying, as an approach, as long as it's designated that this is only applicable for low scale residential. Because I think if you get into the medium or higher scale, it can't work. I mean, you can't take a piece of property and not plan it for high density from the very beginning. You have to plan it that way. I mean, I just as a planner myself, I mean, as an architect, I mean, it's like you can't, for low scale residential, it can work, because you're going to be able to put higher density in the future on the rest of that parcel if it gets developed. In a commercial or even a moderate scale residential, I don't think you can do it.
We want to avoid.
I think you really don't want to encourage that.
I think, Donna, I would agree with that. And I would also add that the ownership typically of land where there's going to be a proposed large scale is going to be owned by the development community as opposed to a landowner who may be only thinking about a few acres of their property right now. So the metrics of who the players are very different. Technology Park is owned by Tech Park Partners.
Are any of you familiar with the Lang property?
I'm not.
Lang, it's off Dorset Street. Because that would be an example of what we would want to avoid. Because it was a farm, and so the farmhouse is at the end of a very, very long, narrow lot, far in. And if there was land that was developable behind it, there it is. That one.
Yeah.
So we want to avoid that.
Yeah,
part.
so I think we gave Paul some, I guess you
So
all
just to
gave
be
me.
clear on that, Michael, I think I would like a little more clarity from you on that, because this is actually a classic example of exactly what you're talking about, where there was call it 40-acre parcel. The Lang family decided to subdivide off this portion of it.
Yep.
And this was built upon. There's a right of way that is provided from Willowbrook back. And so under the rules at the time, the developer, the applicant of the subdivision had to show that what they were doing here and that they would connect to the rest.
So the
But
back-
historically, it was a farm, so.
Right, but if that's your,
That
the
would be
way that I'm
difference.
hearing what you're talking about tonight would enable this. Because they were not required to master plan out the rest of it. is this an example of what you think is good
No.
or not good?
What I'm saying is we wouldn't likely allow a house to be built where their house
If
is.
there was
Ah.
no house on that
Understood.
property.
Okay. In this case, the house was there way before the subdivision was. So
So
yes. Okay. Sorry. I didn't
An
understand your
of a
example.
Spaghetti lot from the sixties.
Right. And so, right. In practice, this kind of thing is much more common than completely undeveloped land.
So, I think our commissioners comfortable with what I asked Paul to do, except for Duncan?
I guess I hear what you're saying, but I still, just based on the amount of developable land we have left, I still want some safeguards. At least I do personally would like to see some safeguards about that land is not encumbered by
But-
work.
So we've been,
Okay. Hang on.
so
Let-
just to clarify what we've been asked to do though, we've been well, I've been asked, I guess, to provide options.
Mhm.
So I do think what Michael talked about should be an option, but it feels like what's in there now, this yield plan continues to be an option, and I don't know if there's some other level. I mean, I think we've been not asked for a recommendation. We've been asked for options, so it seems reasonable to have one option be the yield plan, one option to be access only, and one option to maybe be what you were talking about, which is, something in the middle.
Well,
I'd like
potentially,
to
I
answer
don't know.
Duncan, if I may.
Yeah.
There's nothing that I have said that precludes full development of the land, whether it's undesignated at the moment, some future owner or current owner may decide, I want to fully develop this. I want to build 4 acre, whatever the zoning allows as a maximum. I want to build on those 24 acres. There's nothing that would prevent the owner of the land to fully develop it. So I think your concern is answered, or
But
should be satisfied.
I mean, I think I agree with Doug. Part of the concern is you're assuming that the landowner is going to try to preserve their land with the idea of future development in mind. I think there's a concern.
He might not have it in mind. He might sell it to somebody else.
Sure, but the concern is that someone may self-sabotage the ability to develop that land in the future, either because they don't want to develop, or perhaps just because they didn't think it through really, and they built the current units in a way that just makes it really, really impractical to impossible to develop it. Like, I think that's my concern. I think that's Duncan's concerns as well, is that people, like, they just want to build something now and they're not really thinking about how it might be developed, and they might accidentally make it so no one can ever develop it because of how they divided it now. And I think
that's something we can regulate.
But
With
isn't
the right
that what we're trying to do right now? Like, we're trying.
So that is the yield plan. The yield plan is the most clear way of making sure you've got all the information. I think what I was hearing is that at least some commissioners feel like that's a lot to ask.
What's a
someone
lot to ask?
to do the whole yield
Yeah.
plan for an
I agree.
undesignated area. So,
I would
But
agree.
so it sounds like we've given some ideas, maybe to staff, about ways to help position the land without maybe having to.
Okay, well,
Draw it all
I think
out.
that if you're sort of, if you like this idea of an undesignated piece of land, and some of your feedback is, explore some options between just access and showing some yield plan and explore that, I think that's sufficient guidance for
Let's
now,
do-
because I think
those are
we've got
two options.
boundaries.
Yeah.
I do want to just take a second and say, I think there's another option that we'd like to recommend, which is, we talked about how master plan is required at 2 acres. If you have 4 acres, you can do a carve out of up to 2 acres. We realize that leaves a gap. So if you have a 3-acre parcel, you don't have any option to carve out any portion of that. into the draft regulations. So we would recommend that one option council consider is allow a carve out on anything more than 2 acres, as long as they have 2 acres remaining. So that way you could carve out half an acre from a 2.5 acre parcel, not have to have the burden of responsibility. Because I don't think that that's something that you all
Oh.
intended to do. It just,
Yeah.
It's up
Yeah.
to 2 acres carved out. Doesn't have to be 2 acres.
right. And right now it was only eligible at 4 acres. We're recommending that it be eligible for any property over 2 acres, as long as they have 2 acres left.
I like that, yeah.
I agree with that.
I just want to clarify, because we have the sub options, so the 2 sub options relate to the first one, which is identifying undesignated land,
Right.
Is that?
What I'm hearing is that you all
That's
sort of
what I'm
like this
hoping.
idea of an
Yeah.
undesignated.
Duncan, that you you would go along with the undesignated for, 10 years and either
Oh, yes.
have option 1 or option 2.
Yes, I mean, I'm leaning more towards option 1, but yes.
No,
yeah,
I
yeah,
understand
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and then
Mhm.
you were saying maybe we could do a little bit more on option 2 to demonstrate
I think
access.
what I've heard is that there's sort of a universe between access, yield plan, and master plan, and that you're looking for an option that maybe represents something about the yield plan, but maybe tries to dial back the onerousness a little bit.
Yes.
So how could we write that? That's what I'm
Based-
hearing as an
Yeah,
option.
based on,
It's-
you can
it's-
have undesignated property, so, I mean, I think that retains the, property rights of an owner who has, I don't know, 20 acres. And they want to develop some of it, and they want to preserve some, for
I
as long
also-
as they're living there.
I also heard from Donna that maybe this should only apply to low-scale residential areas, not commercial areas.
Commercial
So-
would be required to do the master plan.
Right.
Yeah.
I would,
I'm okay, I think, with a commercial doing a master
yeah,
plan.
I would
Yeah.
agree with that. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know about the neighborhood commercial.
I think
What
we-
about
How would that fit
medium-
in?
Medium residential.
I guess I'd want to think about it a little bit.
Okay.
I'm, like I said, you do have another meeting between now and Jessica's presentation, so
Okay,
if you'd like, I'd be happy to think on this a little bit and see if we can
yeah, I think that would be
tighten it up a
helpful.
little bit and
Yeah.
come back to you.
I mean, I agree with the commercial, but I'm not
Yeah.
positive about the residential commercial or whatever.
How
we're
far up
calling
the
it.
scale?
Start,
Yeah, yeah.
start option 1 plus sub option 2.
Yeah.
Would be
Okay.
a way to go. And is this something we could get sometime in advance of the next meeting? Because Jessica has to pitch it.
Oh, we have another meeting of just us before I have to pitch it. So I think Paul was saying he can show it to us at our next meeting.
Right, so then when you pitch it, it could be,
Right. And I,
we discussed it and this is.
right, and I think I think council's is expecting a couple of its, not this is the one, but here's 2 or 3
These
different
2.
things that you
Okay.
could do.
And
Okay.
they could say, no, we're gonna keep it as is.
That's
But we did give
It's
it.
in their hands.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Well, do we have anything from the public on this item before we're completely moved on?
Yep.
Okay, we are done.
So there was on your agenda a discussion, sort of a midpoint update of the form-based code work that we've got with our consultant Greg Rabideau. In light of your objectives at the beginning of the meeting to not have meetings go too late, there's nothing that is time sensitive about tonight for that. So if you wanted to have that be on your next agenda, we'd be more than happy to do that. But this is going to be sort of a midpoint check-in on form-based code updates.
I think that would be good, because I mean, I drove around the development and I'd like to think a little bit about one of the things you've asked us to come up with, or what are some other questions? But having just seen the memo, I
Right.
hadn't thought about. 'em.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do
Good.
that.
So a little more time would be good for me.
Okay, any other business?
We have no minutes, right?
No minutes?
AOB.
So
Move to
we
adjourn.
are adjourned.
Excellent.
Adjourned.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody
Thanks,
else.
Paul.
Thank you, everyone.
Feed your dog.
Oh, I put him in the house. He was, it's a little over the top tonight.
Not think like an architect, because these things drive me crazy. The idea that somebody would have a 20 plus piece of acre piece of property.
And not have it all
not
planned.
have any clue as to what the future would be of that property.